Arthur Vance lived in a world of quiet echoes. His Georgetown townhouse, filled with the ghosts of state dinners and whispered negotiations, was a museum of a life lived on the world's stage. The shelves were heavy with books on history and philosophy, the walls adorned with signed photographs of him standing beside men who had shaped the 20th century. Now at 78, his life was one of routine. The morning paper, a slow walk through the crisp autumn air, and the meticulous tending of his bonsai trees, a discipline learned during his time as the U.S. ambassador to Japan. He was, by all accounts, a relic, a charming, well-preserved fossil from the bygone era of analog diplomacy. The modern world arrived in the form of his granddaughter, Catherine. Known to everyone in Washington, D.C. as Cate, she was a meteor streaking through the State Department. At 32, she was the youngest Deputy Assistant Secretary in recent memory, a prodigy of the digital age. Her diplomacy wasn't conducted in quiet, wood-paneled rooms. It was forged in algorithms, data analytics, and aggressive economic modeling. She spoke the language of sanctions, trade deficits, and strategic power, plays not the nuanced dialect of cultural understanding her grandfather had mastered. She swept into his quiet study one Tuesday afternoon, trailing the scent of ambition and expensive perfume. She didn't hug him. She air-kissed the space near his cheek. "Grandfather," she said, her eyes already scanning his collection of artifacts, "I need to pick your brain. The old-school version." Arthur smiled, a gentle, knowing expression. "I only have the one version, Catherine. What's the crisis?" "No crisis. An opportunity," she corrected, pacing in front of his fireplace. "Minister Tanaka is in town. The new Japanese trade deal is stalled on a few key tech tariffs. The White House wants it done. I'm hosting an informal dinner for him at my home on Friday. High stakes." "Kenji Tanaka," Arthur said, a fond memory flickering in his eyes. "A formidable man. I knew his father. He appreciates subtlety. A carefully chosen piece of poetry, a reference to the seasons. That's how you build trust with a man like that." Cate gave a tight, patronizing smile. "That's sweet, grandfather. Really. But we're not exactly in the age of haikus anymore. This deal is about semiconductor supply chains, not cherry blossoms. My team has run the projections. I have the data. I just need to create the right social environment to close." The tension in the room, previously dormant, began to stir. He was offering wisdom. She was asking for stage directions. He saw a human being to be understood. She saw a variable to be controlled. "I thought," she continued, finally stopping her pacing to look at him, "that it might be a nice touch for you to be there, a nod to the long-standing relationship between our families and our nations. You the past, me the future. It's good optics." Optics. The word hung in the air, cold and clinical. He wasn't being invited as a family member or even as a source of wisdom. He was being invited as a prop, a living artifact to be placed in the corner of her carefully curated stage. "Of course I would be honored to meet Kenji-san again," Arthur said, his voice betraying none of the sudden weariness he felt. "Great," she said, already pulling out her phone, her attention fractured. "Just be your charming self. Everyone loves your stories." She looked up, a flicker of warning in her sharp, intelligent eyes. "Just maybe not the long ones about the Cold War. Keep it light." She kissed the air near his cheek again and swept out of the room, leaving him in the sudden, profound silence. He looked at the bonsai tree on his windowsill, its branches twisted into a shape of beautiful, patient endurance. His granddaughter saw him in much the same way he realized. A quaint, ornamental thing, a relic from a world she believed she had rendered obsolete. The storm he sensed was not on the horizon. It was already in the house. The phone call came 2 days later on Thursday morning, just as Arthur was finishing his breakfast. It was Cate, her voice brisk and devoid of pleasantries. "Grandfather, I'm just finalizing the seating chart for tomorrow. I have you next to Mrs. Tanaka. She speaks excellent English, so you won't have to dust off your Japanese. We'll have an interpreter on hand for the minister, of course." "My Japanese is perfectly fine, Catherine," Arthur said gently, "but thank you for the consideration." There was a pause on the line, the kind that precedes a carefully deployed attack. "About that," Cate said, her tone shifting, "I need to be very clear about tomorrow night. This isn't one of your old embassy functions. This is a high-pressure, high-stakes negotiation that happens to be taking place over dinner. The guest list is tight. Every single person there has a specific function." Arthur waited, sensing the verbal blade being unsheathed. "My function," she continued, "is to close this deal. The Secretary of State's function is to provide top cover. The CEO of a major tech firm will be there to talk specifics. Your function is to be nostalgic, a symbol of continuity. That's it." The words were precise, each one a small, sharp jab. He wasn't a participant. He was a piece of scenery. "I understand my role, Catherine," he said, his voice cooler than before. "Do you—" She shot back, a sudden surprising flash of irritation in her voice. "Because with all due respect, Grandfather, your entire style of diplomacy is dead. It's a fossil. This game isn't played with quiet chats and shared cultural references anymore. It's played with leverage, with economic data, with sanctions and tariffs. It's a science now, not an art. You were a wonderful artist in your time, but this is the age of surgeons." It was the most direct she had ever been, the most dismissive. It was a complete repudiation of his life's work, of the very principles he held dear. He had spent 40 years in the Foreign Service believing that diplomacy was the painstaking art of understanding another's soul to find common ground. She had just called him a painter of landscapes in an age of MRI machines. "I see," he said, the two words carrying the weight of his profound disappointment. "I'm glad you do," she said, either missing or ignoring the hurt in his voice. "So tomorrow night I need you to let me lead. No trips down memory lane with the minister about his father, no philosophical tangents. Just smile, be the charming former Ambassador Vance, and please, for the love of God, do not tell any of your long, winding stories from your time in the Cold War. It makes us look quaint, out of touch, out of touch." There it was, the final verdict. He was an embarrassment to her modern, efficient, data-driven world. He wasn't just a prop. He was a potentially malfunctioning prop that needed to be carefully managed. "I will, of course, defer to my host," Arthur said, the formal diplomatic language a shield for his wounded pride. "Excellent. I knew you'd understand. Wear your dark blue suit, the one that's not quite so baggy. See you at 7. She hung up. Arthur stood in his silent kitchen, the receiver still in his hand. He looked at the photos on his wall, at the faces of allies and adversaries with whom he had shared tense silences and triumphant handshakes. They had all believed in the art of the possible, the slow, patient work of building bridges between worlds. His own granddaughter had just told him that his life's work was irrelevant, a museum piece, to be dusted off for special occasions, but kept under glass. The first attack hadn't just been an insult, it had been an obituary. The hurt from Cate's words was a physical ache, a dull throb of a wound inflicted not by an enemy, but by his own blood. For the first time in his long and disciplined life, Arthur Vance considered a retreat. He would not go. He would call her feign a sudden illness and spend the evening in the quiet, dignified company of his books. It would be a small, silent protest, a refusal to be a party to his own effacement. He would not perform the role of the charming fossil she had assigned him. He spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet turmoil, a feeling he hadn't experienced since the tense days leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. He tended to his bonsai with unsteady hands, accidentally snipping a delicate new shoot. He tried to read, but the words on the page blurred, replaced by Cate's dismissive tone. "Your style of diplomacy is dead." That evening, as he was composing the polite, regretful message in his mind, his phone rang again. It was Cate. Her tone had shifted dramatically. The brisk, condescending CEO was gone, replaced by the concerned, slightly wounded granddaughter. It was a performance he recognized instantly, a classic diplomatic maneuver he himself had used countless times, the shift from hard power to soft. "Grandfather, I just wanted to check in," she began, her voice soft with feigned concern. "You were so quiet on the phone this morning. Is everything all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, Catherine." He replied, his guard immediately up. "It's just, I feel like I might have been a bit blunt earlier." She continued the apology, perfectly crafted to contain no actual admission of wrongdoing. "I'm under a tremendous amount of pressure. This Tanaka deal, my entire future at the department is riding on it. I just need everything to be perfect." "I understand pressure, Catherine," he said. "Of course you do," she said, her voice dripping with practiced reverence. "That's why I need you there tomorrow. Minister Tanaka respects you enormously. Your presence, it lends a certain gravitas to the evening that I can't manufacture on my own. It shows a respect for history, for the deep roots of our alliance." It was a masterful reversal. An hour ago he was an out-of-touch relic who needed to be managed. Now he was the embodiment of gravitas and history. She was flattering the very qualities she had previously scorned, trying to soothe the wound she herself had inflicted. "I am considering not attending." Arthur said the words surprising him with their directness. The line went silent for a moment. When Cate spoke again, the soft concern was gone, replaced by a razor's edge of steel. "What did you say?" "I am feeling rather tired. I'm not sure I am up to a formal dinner." "A formal dinner." Her laugh was short and sharp, with no humor in it. "Grandfather, let's not play games. I know what this is. You're insulted. You're being petty because I was honest with you about the realities of modern statecraft." She was framing his protest not as a stand for his own dignity, but as the childish sulking of an old man unable to accept his own irrelevance. It was a brilliant, cruel piece of emotional blackmail. "Your absence would be noted," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "It would be conspicuous. Minister Tanaka would ask why the great Ambassador Vance, his father's old friend, chose not to be there. What am I supposed to say, that my grandfather is boycotting my dinner party because his feelings were hurt? It would be an embarrassment. It would create a distraction. It would reflect poorly on me and, frankly, on our family." There it was, the final turn of the screw. He was being backed into a corner. If he went, he would be a prop, a symbol of an era she despised. If he stayed away, he would be the cause of her potential failure, the petulant old man who sabotaged his own granddaughter's career out of spite. She had left him no honorable way out. It was a checkmate delivered with a silken voice. Arthur closed his eyes. He had faced down Soviet negotiators and navigated Middle Eastern peace talks, but this felt different. This was a battle for his own relevance, fought on the unfamiliar terrain of his own family. "I will be there, Catherine," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I knew I could count on you, grandfather," she said, the warmth returning to her voice now that she had won. 7 o'clock sharp. She hung up, leaving him in the silence of his study. He felt a profound sense of defeat. He would go to her dinner. He would play his part. But the evening would not be a celebration of family or diplomacy. It would be a surrender. Cate's Georgetown home was the antithesis of her grandfather's. Where his house was filled with the warm patina of history, hers was a minimalist temple of glass, steel, and modern art. It was less a home than a statement, a declaration of her arrival on the D.C. power scene. The air was scented with something subtle and expensive, and the quiet hum of a smart home system was the only sound. The guests arrived precisely on time. There was the Secretary of State, a shrewd political operator, a powerful tech CEO whose company was central to the trade deal, and the guest of honor, Minister Kenji Tanaka, a man with intelligent, watchful eyes and an aura of deep, unshakable calm. He was accompanied by his wife and a small entourage of aides. Arthur, dressed in his perfectly tailored but undeniably old-fashioned dark blue suit, was the first to greet the minister. He bowed, not a subservient gesture, but a sign of deep personal respect. "Tanaka-san," Arthur said in flawless, formal Japanese. "It is a profound honor to see you again. Your father was a great man and a dear friend." A flicker of genuine warmth crossed the minister's face. "Vance-san, the honor is all mine. My father spoke of you with the highest esteem. He said you were a man who understood the heart." Cate, standing beside them, smiled tightly. She understood the words, having studied Japanese in college, but she could not grasp the weight of the history they carried. To her it was a pleasant but time-wasting formality. "Minister Tanaka, welcome," she said, stepping forward and taking control, her Japanese technically perfect, but lacking the warmth of her grandfather's. "I am so thrilled you could join us. We have much to discuss." The evening unfolded as a showcase for Cate's brand of diplomacy. She was brilliant, articulate, and relentless. She guided the conversation with the precision of a surgeon, moving seamlessly from economic models to supply chain logistics. She presented data on sleek tablets passed around the table, her arguments sharp, logical, and backed by a mountain of research. Arthur remained a quiet observer, a ghost at the feast, occasionally sharing a brief polite word with Mrs. Tanaka. He was playing the part she had assigned him perfectly. Cate was in her element, confident and utterly in control. The tech CEO was impressed. The Secretary of State was pleased. She could feel the deal crystallizing, the final pieces clicking into place. All she needed was a final personal gesture to seal it. After the main course, she stood up, tapping her glass for attention. "Minister Tanaka," she said, her voice radiating confidence, "on behalf of my family and my country, I wanted to present you with a small token of our esteem, a symbol of the deep and lasting partnership we are building here tonight." An aide stepped forward carrying a beautiful box wrapped in silk. Cate took it and presented it to the minister with a flourish. "This is a very special gift, something I chose personally. A piece of American history to honor our shared future." Minister Tanaka accepted the box with a polite nod. He carefully untied the silk ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, were 4 exquisite antique porcelain teacups, each one hand-painted with a delicate floral design from the early 19th century. They were breathtakingly beautiful. And they were a catastrophe. A silence fell over the room. It was not the appreciative silence of awe, but a sudden, horrifying void of sound. The air grew thick and cold. Minister Tanaka's polite smile didn't vanish. It froze. His face became an impassive mask, his eyes, shuttering all warmth and engagement, instantly extinguished. His wife drew in a sharp, almost inaudible breath. The Japanese aides, who had been murmuring appreciatively, went rigid, their faces paling. The number 4 shy is a homophone for the word for death in Japanese. It is a number steeped in superstition, avoided in gifts, hospital room numbers, and formal settings. To present a gift in a set of 4, especially to an honored guest, was not just a clumsy mistake. It was a profound, almost unimaginable cultural insult. It was like handing someone a beautiful, ornate coffin as a party favor. Cate, flush with the success of her presentation, was oblivious for a precious few seconds. She beamed at the minister, waiting for his delighted response. "They're from the federal period," she explained brightly. Quite rare, I thought. She trailed off as the silence stretched, becoming heavy and suffocating. She finally saw it, the frozen mask on the minister's face, the horror in his aide's eyes, the sudden panicked glance the Secretary of State shot in her direction. The blood drained from her face. A cold wave of nausea washed over her. What did I do? The thought screamed in her mind. She mentally scrolled through her prep files, the cultural briefing her team had prepared. Had they missed something? Had she, the data, the economic models, the carefully planned talking points, all of it dissolved into nothingness? She had just committed a fatal, career-ending error in front of the most important people in the room. The trade deal, her promotion, her entire future, it was all collapsing in this terrible, icy silence. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, but no words came out. What could she say? "I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had just symbolically wished death upon you and our new partnership." Her mind, usually so quick and sharp, was a blank wall of panic. She felt a tremor start in her hands. The room began to spin. She was drowning, and the water was made of her own catastrophic ignorance. The tech CEO cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to fill the void. The Secretary of State looked as if he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. Mrs. Tanaka stared at her plate, her posture impossibly stiff. It was in that moment of absolute soul-crushing failure, as Cate's carefully constructed world was shattering around her, that she heard her grandfather's voice. It was calm, warm, and utterly unperturbed, cutting through the horrifying silence, like a beam of light in a dark cave. "Ah," Arthur Vance said, a gentle, delighted smile on his face as he looked at the cups. "The Four Seasons of Kyoto. How wonderfully thoughtful of you, Catherine." Every head in the room snapped towards Arthur. He remained seated, a picture of serene contemplation, as if this had been the intended reaction all along. Cate stared at him, her mind reeling in confusion. The Four Seasons. What is he talking about? Arthur didn't look at his granddaughter. He kept his warm, respectful gaze fixed on Minister Tanaka. He picked up his own water glass, holding it gently in his hands. "Forgive an old man's reminiscence, Tanaka-san." He began, his voice calm and conversational. "But these beautiful cups remind me of a story from my time in Kyoto. I had the great honor of meeting a master potter, a man named Hiroshi Ito. He was considered a living national treasure. His work was so sought after that there was a waiting list of several years for a single piece." He took a slow sip of water, his timing impeccable. He had captured the entire room's attention, pulling them out of the black hole of awkwardness and into the gentle gravity of his narrative. "Ah, Ito-san was a fascinating man, a true eccentric," Arthur continued. "He refused to sell his pieces individually. He would only create them in sets of 4. The international art dealers were always trying to convince him to make sets of 5, which is, of course, the more traditional and auspicious number for tableware. But he always refused." Cate's mind was racing. This was a lie, a complete fabrication. She had bought the cups from a reputable antiques dealer in Virginia. They had no connection to a Japanese potter. What was he doing? Was he making things worse? "One day," Arthur said, his eyes twinkling, "I was having tea with him in his studio, and I finally gathered the courage to ask him why. 'Ito-san,' I said, 'your work is revered, but many are confused by your insistence on the number 4. He smiled at me, a smile very much like your father's, Tanaka-san, and he said something I have never forgotten." Arthur paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a perfect beat. He said, "Ambassador, a set of 5 represents a celebration. It is, for a moment, a set of 4. A set of 4 represents a life. It is for a journey." He explained that for him the 4 cups were not just cups. They were spring, summer, autumn, and winter. They represented the entire cycle of a year, the completeness of nature. He believed that to truly appreciate beauty, one had to embrace the whole cycle, the new growth of spring, the vibrancy of summer, the melancholy of autumn, and yes, even the quiet, contemplative rest of a long winter. He gestured gracefully towards the box on the table. He believed that a partnership, a friendship, a marriage, it was not just a single celebration, it was a full cycle, a complete journey through all 4 seasons year after year. To receive a gift of 4 from Ito-san was the highest, most personal honor. It was a wish not just for a moment of happiness, but for a lifetime of shared seasons. It was a breathtaking performance, a brilliant, audacious act of diplomatic alchemy. He hadn't corrected Cate. He hadn't apologized for her. He had taken her catastrophic mistake, and through the power of a beautifully constructed narrative, begun the process of transforming it from an insult into a profound, deeply personal compliment. Cate stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, a dawning, disbelieving hope beginning to fight its way through her panic. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The icy tension, so thick just moments before, started to melt under the gentle warmth of Arthur's story. The Japanese aides, who had been rigid with horror, began to exchange small, uncertain glances. The Secretary of State leaned back in his chair, a flicker of profound admiration in his eyes. Arthur, sensing the shift, pressed his advantage not with aggression, but with an even deeper display of respect and understanding. He turned his full attention to Minister Tanaka, and in a softer, more intimate tone, he switched to flawless, respectful Japanese. Of course, Tanaka-san, he said, Ito-san's philosophy was a very personal expression of the deeper Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi. The idea of finding beauty and imperfection in the transient, in the complete cycle of life and nature. The effect of him speaking Japanese was immediate and profound. It was no longer a performance for the whole table. It was an intimate conversation between 2 men who understood a world of nuance the others could not. Cate, who had prided herself on her textbook fluency, felt a flush of shame. Her Japanese was a tool. His was a language. He didn't just speak it, he inhabited it. He taught me, Arthur continued in Japanese, that the most meaningful partnerships between nations, like the finest pottery, are not the ones that are perfect and shiny on the surface. They are the ones that can endure all 4 seasons. The hopeful spring of new agreements, the prosperous summer of shared growth, the difficult autumn of disagreement, and even the cold winter of crisis. To endure all 4 and to emerge into spring once more. That is the mark of a true and lasting friendship. He looked at the 4 cups, his expression one of sincere admiration. My granddaughter Catherine is of a new generation. They are brilliant. They are fast. They see the world through the powerful lens of data and logic. But perhaps in her own way she was reaching for an older, deeper truth. A truth that our partnership is not just for the easy summer but for all the seasons to come. A complete 4-season partnership. A most unconventional and yet a most profound sentiment. The reframing was complete. The disastrous gift was no longer an ignorant insult related to death. It was now a deeply philosophical, if unorthodox, gesture of commitment, a nod to the enduring cyclical nature of a powerful alliance. It was a move of such breathtaking intellectual and emotional agility that it left everyone in the room stunned. Minister Tanaka had remained impassive throughout Arthur's story, his face a mask of diplomatic neutrality. But now, as Arthur finished, the ice in his eyes finally broke. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He looked at Arthur, and for the first time that evening, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect. Then he turned to a stunned and silent Cate. He picked up one of the delicate porcelain cups from its velvet bed, holding it up to the light. "My apologies, Vance-san," the minister said to Arthur in Japanese, a warm, amused twinkle in his eye. "It seems I, too, had forgotten the wisdom of the great Potter Ito." He then turned back to Cate and switched to English, his voice now warm and engaging once more. "Your grandfather is a very wise man, Deputy Secretary Vance. Please tell me more about this four-season partnership. It is a concept I find most intriguing. The decisive blow had been struck, and it hadn't been a blow at all. It had been an act of rescue, a masterpiece of grace. Kate's career, which had been hanging by a thread over a precipice of her own making, had just been saved by the very man whose wisdom she had declared dead and buried. The breaking of the tension was as palpable as a physical shockwave. A collective, silent sigh of relief rippled through the room. The Secretary of State, a man not easily impressed, gave Arthur a look of pure, unadulterated awe. The tech CEO, who had been nervously checking his phone, put it away and leaned forward, suddenly fascinated. The Japanese aides, their faces now relaxed and smiling, began to murmur appreciatively. The dinner party, which had been on the verge of becoming a diplomatic incident of catastrophic proportions, was now transformed. It became warmer, more genuine, more productive than Cate could have ever imagined. The conversation shifted from the cold, hard numbers of tariffs and trade to the shared values and long-term vision Minister Tanaka had found so intriguing. The deal, which had been stalled for weeks, was not only back on track, it was being solidified on a foundation of newfound respect and goodwill. Cate was a ghost at her own party. She was a spectator to her own success, a success she had not earned but had been gifted. She watched in a state of humbled silence as her grandfather, the man she had dismissed as a fossil, effortlessly charmed and engaged the minister. He spoke of art, of history, of his father's love for fly fishing in Montana. He didn't tell long, winding stories of the Cold War. He wove a rich tapestry of shared humanity, demonstrating in real time the very art of diplomacy she had declared dead. The power dynamic in the room and within her own family had been completely and irrevocably inverted. Her modern, data-driven approach had led her to the brink of disaster. His obsolete, human-centric wisdom had not only saved the day, but had achieved a deeper, more meaningful connection than her spreadsheets ever could. The other guests, who had initially deferred to her as the rising star, now directed their questions and their respect towards Arthur. He was no longer the quaint prop. He was the quiet center of gravity around which the entire evening now revolved. Her humiliation was profound, but it was a quiet internal reckoning. No one shamed her. No one pointed out her failure. The grace with which Arthur had saved her was so complete that it didn't allow for public embarrassment. But she knew. In the eyes of the Secretary of State, in the warm, respectful gaze of Minister Tanaka, she saw the truth. They knew she had failed, and they knew she had been saved. When the evening finally concluded with handshakes, warm smiles, and a palpable sense of accomplishment, Cate walked her guests to the door. Minister Tanaka paused before leaving and turned to Arthur, bowing deeply. "Vance-san," he said in Japanese, "tonight was a masterclass. It was an honor." Then he turned to Cate, his expression polite, but his eyes carrying a clear, gentle lesson. "You have a great treasure in your grandfather, Deputy Secretary. Wisdom, like fine porcelain, becomes more valuable with age." As the door closed behind the last guest, Cate was left standing in her perfect minimalist foyer, the silence of the house pressing in on her. Her victory felt hollow, a trophy she hadn't won. The dominoes had fallen, but not in the way she had ever expected. Her career was safe, the deal was done, but her arrogance, her certainty, her entire world view had been shattered into a million pieces. The man she had tried to silence had just become the architect of her success, and in doing so had exposed the profound, dangerous poverty of her own approach. After the last of the staff had discreetly departed, a heavy, profound silence settled between Arthur and his granddaughter. Cate stood in the middle of her vast, impersonal living room, looking small and lost. Her usual armor of confidence and ambition was gone, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She, who always had the right words, the perfect talking point, was utterly speechless. She looked at her grandfather, who was standing by the window, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't gloating. There was no "I told you so" in his posture, no hint of smug satisfaction. There was only a quiet, contemplative stillness. This absence of triumph was in its own way more devastating than any rebuke would have been. "Grandfather," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I thank you." The words felt pathetic, utterly inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done. He hadn't just saved a trade deal, he had saved her. Arthur turned from the window, his eyes not angry or disappointed, but filled with a deep, weary sadness. "You almost made a terrible mistake, Catherine," he said softly. "Not just with the gift, but with your entire approach. You were so focused on winning, you forgot about understanding." "I know," she whispered, shame washing over her. "I was arrogant. I thought your way was obsolete." He walked over to a small built-in bookshelf that held a few decorative volumes. He ran his fingers along their spines before pulling one out. It was a small old cloth-bound book, its title stamped in faded gold-leaf chrysanthemum and sword, a classic study of Japanese culture. He held it out to her. "I was given this book by a mentor when I was your age, just starting out. I thought I knew everything then, too." Cate took the book, her hands trembling slightly. It felt heavy, filled with a weight that had nothing to do with its pages. "Diplomacy isn't about data, Catherine," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Data can tell you what people do, it can never tell you why. The why is where understanding lives. The why is where trust is built. And trust is the only currency that truly matters in the end. This isn't a science. It's about people. It always has been, and it always will be." This was his final comeback, his ultimate, "I told you so." It wasn't a gloat about his own cleverness, but a profound, fundamental lesson about their shared profession. He had revealed his true, secret weapon, and it wasn't a clever story or a knowledge of obscure customs. It was a deep, abiding belief in the importance of human connection. He had not only saved her career, he was now trying to save her soul as a diplomat. Tears welled in Cate's eyes, real tears this time, born not of frustration or panic, but of a humbling, painful, and ultimately transformative realization. She had been so busy trying to build the future that she had dismissed the timeless wisdom of the past. "I have so much to learn," she said, clutching the book to her chest. Arthur gave her a small, sad smile. "Yes," he said, "you do. We all do. That is the beginning of wisdom." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and forgiveness she hadn't realized she was so desperate for. "It was a long night. I should go home." He walked to the door, leaving her alone in her silent, perfect house, with the old wise book in her hands. The real victory had just been won, not at the dinner table, but in this quiet, humbling moment of education. Arthur Vance returned to his quiet townhouse, the adrenaline of the evening slowly fading, leaving behind a familiar, contemplative peace. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a deep, bone-weary sadness for his granddaughter and the hard lessons she still had to learn, but also a quiet satisfaction. He had not acted out of a desire for revenge, but out of a duty to his past, to his friend's memory, and to the principles he had dedicated his life to. His own worth had been challenged, and he had met that challenge not with anger, but with competence and grace. That he knew was the only true form of justice. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey and sat in his worn leather armchair in the study. He was at peace. He had not sought the confrontation, but when it came, he had been ready. His skills, the ones Cate had dismissed as obsolete, had proven to be timeless. A week later, a package arrived from the Japanese embassy. Inside was a bottle of exquisitely rare 30-year-old Hibiki whiskey and a handwritten note on the minister's personal stationery. The note was in Japanese, written in elegant, flowing calligraphy. "Vance-san," it read, "true partnership, like fine whiskey, is a product of time, patience, and a deep understanding of the seasons. Thank you for reminding me of this essential truth. It was an honor to be in the presence of a true master of the art. Your father would have been proud of the man you have become. With deepest respect, Kenji Tanaka." Arthur smiled a genuine, untroubled smile. He placed the note on his desk, a quiet testament to a battle won, not with force, but with wisdom. The final scene of the story belongs to Cate. We see her not in a high-stakes meeting or a television studio, but alone in her office late at night. The data charts and economic models on her large computer screens are dark. The only light comes from a small desk lamp illuminating the pages of the old cloth-bound book her grandfather had given her. She is reading it slowly, carefully, a highlighter in her hand, her brow furrowed in concentration. On her desk next to the book is a small framed photograph. It's not of her with a senator or a world leader. It's an old faded picture of a much younger Arthur standing beside a smiling Japanese man, a man she now knows was Minister Tanaka's father. She has a long way to go. The arrogance of youth is not shed overnight, but a seed of true understanding of a deeper, more human form of diplomacy has been planted. She has been given a second chance, a new beginning earned for her by the quiet, enduring strength of the past she was so eager to forget. Arthur Vance, in his quiet study, had found his own form of justice, not through revenge, but through the quiet, undeniable, and timeless power of his own worth. Arthur's story resonates deeply in a modern world that often prizes new data over old wisdom, and quick victories over patient understanding. It's a powerful reminder that some skills are never obsolete. In our rush to innovate and disrupt, we sometimes forget that human connection, empathy, and cultural respect are not soft skills. They are the very bedrock of any meaningful negotiation, whether it's in a corporate boardroom or at our own family dinner table. Many of us in our careers or personal lives have felt like Arthur, sidelined by a newer, faster generation that speaks a language we don't quite understand. This story shows that true worth isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the wisdom to know what to say when the silence becomes deafening. As the old American proverb goes, "Still waters run deep." Arthur's quiet dignity and profound knowledge were deeper and more powerful than all his granddaughter's ambition. He didn't seek to tear her down. He chose to build her up, teaching her that the long view of history and a genuine understanding of people will always triumph over short-term tactics. It proves that what goes around does indeed come around, and the true strength isn't about proving others wrong, but about having the grace and skill to make things right. How did Arthur's method of saving his granddaughter resonate with you? Was it a more satisfying form of justice than outright revenge? We would be honored to read your thoughts and impressions in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give it a like to show your support and subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complexities of human nature. Thank you for watching. May you always have the wisdom to see the value in every season of life.